So how do criminal groups actually take hold and, evolve, adapting across different times, different places?
It's a fascinating question.
Yeah, and today on the deep dive, we're going to look right at that. We're examining two quite distinct street gangs, the Miami Boys and the Lucerne Street Doggz.
Right. Separated by geography, by decades even.
Yeah.
But their stories, they offer some, well, surprising insights into how organized crime really works.
Exactly. And where's this info coming from?
Okay, so for this deep dive, we've got access to a range of sources. Think news reports, academic analyses, stuff that really details their history, their structure, and importantly, their impact on communities.
Good.
Our goal here is really to boil down that core knowledge, give you a clear picture of how things went for them.
Right. So our mission is to get how they emerged, how they operated day to day on the ground, and what factors influenced their path, where they ended up. And by looking at these two specific cases, you, the listener, should get a richer feel for the bigger forces at play, right? With gang activity, law enforcement challenges, all of it.
Precisely.
Okay, let's dive in. We'll start with Miami Boys. South Florida, early 1980s.
That's right. The Miami Boys really started making waves in the early 80s, down in Miami mainly.
Okay.
But what's pretty striking is just how fast their influence spread.
Yeah.
I mean, by 1986, they weren't just in Miami.
No. Where else?
They were operating in other cities, other states across the southeast U.S.
Wow. That quickly.
Yeah, that kind of rapid expansion, it suggests a pretty effective setup, organizationally speaking, something worth keeping in mind.
And they picked up a nickname too, right? The Untouchables.
They did. The Untouchables.
What does a name like that imply? What does it tell us?
Well, a name like the Untouchables, it suggests a certain air of invincibility, doesn't it? It likely spread fear, in the community among rivals.
Sure.
And while history shows, well, they weren't literally untouchable. It definitely reflects that early power they had, their reach. It makes you ask, doesn't it? How much does that reputation actually help a group like this succeed?
It absolutely adds to the image, the mystique, and their structure wasn't typical either, from what I gather. Not for a street gang.
No, not at all. Our sources describe the Miami Boys structure as being, well, more like a paramilitary group.
Paramilitary? How so?
A fake hierarchy, clear chains of command, a more disciplined approach maybe than you'd expect from a sort of loosely organized street crew.
Okay.
They had assigned ranks. They even divided up territory into specific quadrants.
Quadrants.
Yeah. And here's something really noteworthy. Their weapons.
Ah.
They were armed with serious stuff. Soviet AK-47s, Uzi submachine guns, that level of organization, plus access to those kinds of weapons. Pretty unusual for a street gang back then.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Highly coordinated, heavily armed, way beyond just corner dealing.
Definitely.
And their expansion, it seems like money, the economics of it, was a huge driver.
Absolutely. Take their move into Atlanta by '86. This shows you a basic principle of, illegal markets. They exploit differences.
How do you mean?
Well, an ounce of cocaine might sell for X amount in Miami.
Right.
But you take it to Atlanta, and suddenly it's worth triple that, 3 times the price.
Triple. Wow.
Yeah. That huge price difference, it wasn't just about profit, though obviously that was key. It created this massive arbitrage opportunity.
Arbitrage. Okay. So exploiting the price gap.
Exactly. For you listening, it's a reminder that even crime often follows basic economic purpose, Supply, demand, different prices in different places.
So they weren't just selling drugs, they were specifically targeting that price gap. They saw Atlanta as like an open market.
Precisely. And when they moved in, they basically pushed out the local, smaller operators, people who just couldn't compete with their resources, their organization.
Makes sense.
And we see a similar thing when they moved into Jacksonville, Florida, also around 1986. There, they became big players in the growing crack and heroin trade. Shows they could adapt, right? Different drugs, different markets.
And they stuck around in Jacksonville for a while.
Yeah, quite a long run there. The last known Miami Boys dealer wasn't actually arrested until 1999.
1999, that's quite a stretch.
It is. It really makes you think about the kind of long-lasting grip these groups can have on a place.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you said, they weren't truly untouchable. These groups rarely last forever. What happened? What led to their decline?
Well, in Atlanta specifically, their decline seems tied, maybe indirectly, to the city getting ready for the 1996 Summer Olympics.
The Olympics, how?
Think about it. Massive international event coming. Law enforcement ramps up. There are big efforts to, clean up the city.
Ah, increased pressure, visibility.
Exactly. And that general crackdown, that disruption, it hit the Miami Boys operations hard. It wasn't necessarily one single operation targeting them, but more a side effect, you could say. It's a fascinating example of how these big societal shifts, like urban development for an event, can mess up established criminal networks.
So sometimes the solution isn't direct, it's collateral.
In a way, yeah. It shows you that tackling these complex problems can have surprising indirect outcomes.
Okay, so that's the Miami Boys. Now let's shift gears completely. Head north, different era, Boston, the Lucerne Street Doggz.
Right, a totally different context. The Lucerne Street Doggz popped up much later, 2003.
Where exactly?
In Boston, Massachusetts. Specifically, the Lucerne Street area, which is in the Mattapan neighborhood.
Okay, Mattapan. And the stats associated with them. Pretty stark, right?
Yeah, immediately striking. Get this. In 2006 alone, just 1 year, this one gang was reportedly involved in 37 shootings in Boston.
37 from one group.
Yes. And what's really significant about that number, it accounted for a full 10% of all shootings in the entire city that year.
10%? Wow. That really gives you a sense of the intensity of the violence, doesn't it?
It does. A huge level of activity and violence linked to this one group pretty soon after they formed. For you listening, it highlights how localized gang activity can just have this massive, disproportionate impact on safety in a community.
And their activities may be more what you'd expect from a sort of contemporary localized gang, but still incredibly damaging.
Oh, absolutely. The sources link the Lucerne Street Doggz to drug trafficking, robbery, and sadly, murder.
Right.
These are the crimes that hit neighborhoods directly, devastatingly.
And unlike the Miami Boys, who seemed more top-down maybe, the Lucerne Street Doggz seem more tangled up in the local scene.
That seems to be the picture, yeah. While the Miami Boy sources really emphasize that paramilitary-like structure,
right,
the info on the Lucerne Street Doggz paints more of a picture of a network street gang. They had reported allies, like the Mascot Street Killers, and rivals, too, like the Norfolk Street Bulls, Moore Street County. It shows you that complex web, right? Yeah. Alliances, beefs, that often defines gang life in a specific city area.
So it's not always one big dominant group, but maybe more of a shifting landscape of connected crews?
Exactly. It's often more fluid than that.
Okay. So we've looked at these two really distinct cases. You've got the Miami Boys, peak crack era, seemingly sophisticated setup, wide reach, and then the Lucerne Street Doggz. Much more recent, deeply rooted in one Boston neighborhood, tied to this intense local violence. When you put them side by side, what are the key takeaways? The main differences, maybe similarities?
Well, it's fascinating to contrast what seems to have driven their prominence, right?
Yeah.
For the Miami Boys, like we said, it seems economics. That price arbitrage plus that more organized structure really fueled their expansion.
You're right, the business side almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Whereas the Lucerne Street Doggz, they seem much more tied to local turf disputes, the drug trade right there in their community. Their impact is marked by that incredibly high rate of gun violence in a pretty small area.
So different drivers, different kinds of impact.
Yeah. And for you, the comparison really shows that even though we label both street gangs, the actual forces shaping how they work and what they do can be really different.
It hammers home that point, doesn't it? Street gang isn't just one thing. The dynamics, the motives, how they operate, it varies hugely.
Exactly.
The Miami Boys almost seem like a criminal company, expanding market share, profit-driven, while the Lucerne Street Doggz feel more locked into specific turf and conflicts.
That's a good way to put it. And if we zoom out, connect it to the bigger picture, what we should probably take away is that gang activity isn't monolithic. It's not one single phenomenon.
Right.
It's shaped by all sorts of factors. The economy, sure, but also which drugs are big at the time, the social dynamics already there in a community, even as we saw with the Olympics, big external events.
Yeah.
That paramilitary structure the Miami Boys had, maybe not totally unique, but it certainly helped them expand and control bigger areas. By contrast, the Lucerne Street Doggz' impact, it seems much more localized, but maybe felt even more intensely right there on their streets.
Okay. So, bringing this deep dive toward a close, we've explored these contrasting stories, Miami Boys, Lucerne Street Doggz, two really compelling examples across different times, different places. We've seen how things like drug market economics, how they organize themselves, local beefs, even citywide events like the Olympics can shape how they rise and eventually fall.
And that leaves us, and you the listener, with a pretty important question to chew on, I think.
Yeah.
Reflecting on these two examples, what are the bigger, maybe deeper societal factors that allow groups like this to form in the first place, and what contributes to them fading away or changing?
And the ongoing challenges, too.
Exactly. What are the continuing challenges for communities, for law enforcement, trying to deal with the, frankly, complex realities of gang activity?
It's a good reminder, isn't it? These aren't just isolated incidents. They often reflect deeper issues in society.
With significant, often long-lasting consequences. Definitely something to think about.